Hello, good evening, and welcome to Old Romans Unscripted with me here in the UK. And good afternoon, Brother Stanislaus. How are you?
I'm doing well, Excellency. How are you?
Not too bad, thank you. Brother
Good.
Stanislaus, of course, joining us from Detroit, USA. And sadly, tonight we haven't got Bishop Kelly with us, and Father Tom sent his apologies as well. So it's just the two of us, I'm afraid. So if you can bear that after an hour and a half of us last night, then that's all well and good. Now, what we thought we'd do, just to sort of change things a little bit, was to suggest that perhaps we might answer questions. So if you have any questions you'd like to ask, particularly perhaps about anything topical, so perhaps about Traditionis Custodes, if you haven't heard enough already, or generally about the situation and crisis in the church, or if you'd like to ask anything spiritual, that would be nice. You could ask us about that as a little test. What tomorrow is the liturgical day? What liturgical day is it tomorrow? Of course, it's Sunday. We know that much. But just to test, what is tomorrow for Sunday? Please do in the comments say hello. We have Ferdinand there, who is giving us an applause. Thank you, Ferdinand. Greet us in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from. It's always good and interesting to know. I could, of course, just look it up afterwards, but it's much more interesting to greet you and welcome you from wherever you are while we're on air. Now, as I say, last night, Brother Stanislaus and I gave the second in a new series that Brother is hosting. Hi, Anne. Welcome from Ireland. God bless you. Do you want to just give us a kind of précis, Brother Stanislaus, about the series, the purpose of the series? So this is
Sure.
the Friday night show following the Angelus on Old Roman TV.
Yes. Well, the purpose of this show is to look at current events through a purposefully catechetical perspective, hopefully giving a proper Roman Catholic response to so many of the current issues. And then, of course, there's some room for opinion there, and it makes it a fast-running show. We do go in depth, more in depth than probably we have in other opportunities. So, if that's what people are looking for, they can certainly find it in our show.
Excellent, excellent. And we've had some great feedback actually from the last two shows, especially. Lots of people interested in us as old Romans. Some of them thought we were long extinct. Some of them are surprised to find us, to discover us. So that's always good. If you want to know more about us, of course, you should visit www. What was that? 1, 2, 3. www.theoldroman.com. And please, oh, hi, Peggy. Peggy there from East Tennessee. Greetings to you. Yes, theoldroman.com. And it's well worth dipping into theoldroman.com several times a day. Because it's being updated all the time with the very latest news and views from the world of Catholic tradition. So literally, as news breaks sometimes, theoldroman.com is one of the first to not break the story, but as soon as the story's broken, to release it to the world. Now, of course, one or two things from hi there, TV detective. That, of course, is Abel. Brother Stanislaus, that's Abel that we were on line with just earlier. From Northwest Texas. He greets you too. Excellent. Don't forget that if you have a question about anything in the news this week, please do feel free to ask us in the comments. Now, there was a particularly important story that broke this past week, and I'm surprised that I haven't got, or maybe I'm not so surprised, I haven't got a picture, I don't think, of literally the culprit. Oh, yes, I have. There we are. Yes, somebody we haven't heard of for a little while, who reappeared in the headlines this week. One Mr. McCarrick. You see him there dressed in cardinal robes. Of course, he was defrocked earlier this year. Was it? No, last year. And the news broke this week that he is going to be facing criminal charges for the abuse that he inflicted in the particular instance on a 16-year-old boy at a wedding reception in the 70s. But of course, as everybody knows, over the past 18 months, there are lots of other victims, but many of whom were over the technical age, as it were, of maturity. So many have asked, for example, why Cardinal McCarrick, as he was then, was not tried at the Vatican. And in part, it's because his victims were over 18 or over the age of maturity, or for in terms of canon law. Therefore, was not considered necessarily abuse. Of course, it was, I think, and many others think, a great mistake that he was laicized, because being laicized, now, of course, the Church has no control or influence over what happens to him at all, and he no longer has to respond to canonical allegations or accusations or canon law. Some have opined that this was perhaps deliberate, that perhaps it was undesirable to have a senior cardinal placed on trial at the Vatican for such kinds of offences. However, of course, perhaps they've learned that lesson now that Cardinal Becciu is on trial for financial irregularities at the Vatican. That case started this week as well. So there's a lot been going on in church news, but the former Cardinal McCarrick, of course, cannot face canonical charges, but he has been brought up on criminal charges. Did you see this news, Brother Stanislaus? Have you been following this?
Oh, yes. I think that here it was presented, well, it was presented under the where he is. It was discovered who's holding him and why is a Catholic institution allowing his presence, because he's staying at with a community that is dedicated to helping priests with troubles. So he's there. I have I read the story. I kind of certainly appreciate where people are coming from. However, I was kind of glad to read that he was in a spiritual place. This place, it's not like he was accepted at the local Carmel or something like that. This is a retreat center that is closed to the public. It's only for priests who are in some sort of difficulties. And unfortunately, over the last 40, 50 years, rather than seeing what they typically saw, which was priests struggling with alcoholism or just being very overly worked, overly tired, they began to see a priest who struggled with sexual types of things. So he's there, And I'm thinking, well, he's probably getting the counseling he needs. I'm glad he's someplace where he can find prayer, where he can find support. I mean, he's still a child of God. He's still, as long as he's willing to recognize his faults, all the mercies available to him. And I'm glad that he's in a place where that can be fortified, and he can truly live that life of repentance. So I don't understand why so many people are upset to find out where he is. But that's just my take on it. Cardinal McCarrick is someone, I don't know him, but he did provide a couple of, ordained a couple of my brother religious in my former community, one in particular. And I have a little story about him, because there at the shrine where we all were gathered for the ordination, um, the it was also a weekend dedicated to the local American Indians. So during this ordination that Cardinal McCarrick was leading, you had Native American Indians doing strange dances outside around a fire. And as soon as the ordination was done, Cardinal McCarrick ran out there to join them. It was a very, very strange day seeing all that. So I personally saw some of those things, but I still think that I would hope that he's feeling a lot of remorse, which we all go through when we sin. When there should be remorse, sorrow for our sins. And the fact that he's somewhere that he can actually get the help that he needs, I think is a good thing.
Yeah, yeah, I have to agree with you. As we've been saying several times in the past week, even for Pope Francis Traditionis Custodes, he needs our prayers, and likewise, so does Mr. McCarrick. I think a fundamental principle of our lives as Christians is not just about receiving mercy, but being also merciful in turn ourselves. Yeah. Remember that to fulfill the second commandment of the summary of the law, to love your neighbor, and Jesus says in St. John, love one another as I have loved you. Now we, of course, surely all hope and desire that Jesus loves us enough to forgive us all the various things that we have done in our lives that we're none too proud of and shouldn't be proud of. In like fashion, surely we should wish that Mr. McCarrick is receiving the psychological and spiritual counselling necessary to bring him to a place of acceptance for what he's inflicted upon others, for repentance, and ultimately, hopefully, for healing through contrition and forgiveness. Surely we would wish that for ourselves. If any of us were in a similar situation, we should always practice charity as much as we are able. That, of course, doesn't mean to say that we can't criticize, because McCarrick's crimes are more than just his sexual misdemeanors. There's also the political and financial affairs that he has manipulated for his own self-interest and gain, and that of others too. But there is a great deal that he has to be contrite for. There's a lot that he could repent of. And let's hope that he avails himself of the gospel, as we hope that we all will, this side of heaven. Remember, it's only in this life that we have the opportunity to repent of our sins, and to be healed, restored, and forgiven. What we don't want is to die with our sins extant and attached and unaddressed, for these, of course, will then consign us and condemn us in the next life. So it's a good reminder for us all, and especially while some of us are now able to enjoy more of our personal liberty, to avail ourselves of the sacrament of penance and get those things addressed and dealt with now that need to be, especially our mortal sins, so that should anything tragic happen, we might be in as full state of grace as we can be. Now, a question has come up from Anne in Ireland about Archbishop Wilson Gregory. I think it's Wilson Gregory rather than Fulton Gregory. Wilson Gregory, who is the cardinal now, Archbishop of Washington, D.C., who earlier this week, following the motu proprio Traditionis Custodes, cancelled a traditional Latin Mass that was due to be offered at the National Shrine in Washington. Now, what's interesting about this, of course, is that the National Shrine, the Basilica, is not a personal parish and it's not a parish. It's in fact extra diocesan. Archbishop Gregory is, I believe, chair of the board of trustees for the National Shrine, but technically speaking, it wouldn't fall under the supposed restrictions that Traditionis Custodes otherwise enforces. So many have been interpreting this as a very interesting development. We know that Archbishop Gregory considers himself well in, as it were, with the current Holy Father. It is believed that he enjoys a certain amount of liberal access, shall we say, to the powers that be in Rome, and certainly that with certain others he would be one who desires, or one who seems to desire Vatican backing for all sorts of policy positions that he and others have taken re the Catholic Church in America. For example, he was one of the 68 bishops who signed a letter that didn't want the Catholic Bishops' Conference to discuss the document on communion and the Eucharist. In other words, didn't want a discussion to take place about the banning of pro-abortion politicians from receiving Holy Communion, those who pretend to be Catholic. And I think it would be fair to say that Archbishop Gregory is one of those progressive leaning prelates in the American Church. Would that be right? A fair assessment?
I think you're being kind to the Archbishop, as we know him here in the United States, formerly the Archbishop of Atlanta. He has a well-known history from all perspectives. I mean, the conservatives know him and the progressives know him, and he's a friend of the progressives, no doubt. He always has been. It's my opinion that Cardinal Gregory is the de facto leader here in the United States of the bishops. And I think it's not only just interesting what he did, he was one of the ones, which I haven't seen anybody point out yet, but he was one of the bishops who immediately answered the motu proprio by saying, well, for now, everybody can do what they want, can do as it has been. Let me study this and we'll answer soon. Okay, didn't take him that long. And you can't. And the thing is that this Holy Mass, a pontifical high mass, was already approved. It was approved. It was there. They had asked him about it earlier in the summer. He didn't see any problem with it, you know. And so they did the advertising, they everything. I went to one when I was in Washington D.C. They are packed. In fact, the only reason I got a seat was because I was a seminarian. And the basilica in the main chapel where it's had, or the main church where it is, seats 2,000. Then underneath in the church I forget what they're calling the basement, the crypt church, that seats, you can get at least 2,000, 3,000 people down there, because there's dozens of small chapels. It's one of the things about the National Shrine. And so he right away canceled it. And like you rightfully said, it's really not his place. It's not his church. He's not, as would be the diocesan cathedral, which is about 2 miles away. But I think this was a sign. This was he was signaling from Francis to Gregory in D.C., and Gregory signaling to everybody else in the United States. This is how you handle it. This is how Pope Francis wants it handled. And you'll see Supich will be next. He's got a little bit of a different, because he's got to deal with a lot more. This was easy for, Wilton Gregory is untouchable as long as Pope Francis is on the chair. And he knows it, and Pope Francis knows. That's why I think that this is all the word that they use is cabal. He's part of it. They did it on purpose, and this is what we face. So the Paulus Institute, which puts on these things, already offered a rebuttal and went to Cardinal Gregory and asked him to reinstate the Holy Mass based on their arguments, and they're solid arguments. But he's going to look at it, if he looks at it, and he'll shrug his shoulders, and it'll go in the trash. There will not be that pontifical mass in the Basilica. I probably won't see another one in my lifetime. Thanks be to God, I got to see one, because it was grand. They do the Capa Magna and everything, so it was grand to see. But you and I both know that any low mass done with devotion is, I get just as much out of it. The solemn pontifical high mass, even though it is grand to see. But no, I don't think so. And will they find another place? I think the word is kind of getting out that no use fighting. We have a saying, can't fight City Hall. And I think that's just in this way. You can't fight the Vatican.
Well, yes and no.
Yeah.
It depends. It depends what you want out of it.
Mm-hmm.
If you want favour, then no.
Yeah.
If you're not so bothered about that, then it doesn't really matter. And of course the Basilica at Washington it's a fantastic building, and of course was built for, ironically, the traditional Latin Mass. That's why there are so many chapels. That's why there are so many side chapels, because it was to accommodate all the pilgrim priests, who in the early days came to with their groups, and to offer Mass.
Yes.
Much just as in Rome until a few months ago, of course. It was usual for priests to come with pilgrims and offer Mass in the side chapels. All of that is going. All of that, as if the Holy Fathers, Pope Francis gets his way, all of that will be gone. And my brothers and sisters, we shouldn't underestimate the feeling behind the enemies of tradition. They really do want the traditional Latin Mass gone. That's one of the most shocking and revealing things about the letter that accompanied the motu proprio when Francis sent it to the bishops, because he makes it quite clear that as far as he's concerned, the traditional Latin Mass is finished. He wants it gone. The role of the diocesan appointed priests to serve the Latin Mass communities is basically to wind them down, is basically to close them down and catechize them to receive the new Mass, and then to rejoin the rest of the church. That's where he's coming from. That is where Pope Francis is coming from. As I've said several times, I know this is not about aesthetics. This is about the faith. This is a battle for the Catholic faith. It's not about aesthetics. It's not about music and vestments and all the other peripheral stuff. It's not about that. It is about the faith. It's about what's core and central to the faith. And as I keep saying, and as many others, better than I have said before, the Novus Ordo Missae, the new Mass, does not convey Catholic belief. Does not convey Catholic belief in constancy and continuity and consistency with the perennial tradition of the Church and of her liturgy, expressed, of course, in the traditional Latin Mass. The Novus Ordo, it's almost a new religion. It's almost a new religion. I mean, it's not. It's well, almost in the sense that the only reason why it's not new is because it's actually Protestant. So it's not new. So it's not new. Yeah. But the Novus Ordo was conceived for Protestants, was written by Protestants, and essentially is a Protestant manifesto, theological manifesto. It's got next to nothing to do with the Catholic faith.
I noticed something else happening already, because it's only been 2 weeks since the release of the motu proprio. But the other thing I noticed was the sympathetic side of the church that has kind of been shown as sort of outraged at this, saying, how can you do this? I'm not a Latin Mass goer, but I understand what they want and all that, so leave them alone, whatever. Okay. Finally, as you know, Cardinal Burke said what needed to be said, what we have been saying, but of course he's got a bigger audience. And, he asked, does the Pope have this authority? And a very well-known sympathizer Vaticanista wrote an article. He's got a following as well, questioning Cardinal Burke, because we should all just get along, that this is causing disunity. And so what I realized is that, is this not gaslighting? Are they not gaslighting the traditional Latin Mass?
Well, I mean, Francis has been doing that since the beginning of his pontificate, of course. Again, one of the ironies is his passing reference to abuses, liturgical abuses, with the Novus Ordo. And he is one of, the most well-known liturgical abusers of the Novus Ordo. He it is who insists on Maundy Thursday breaking the rubrics concerning the mandatum, the ceremony of the washing of feet, in commemoration of Christ washing the feet of the apostles. Every year he chooses, a bunch of people who, for appreciable reasons, maybe, well-meaning and nice people, but they're not clerics, and they're not substitutes for clerics, and some of them aren't even Catholics, some of them aren't even Christians. And you notice it's become popular for the progressives now to complain about traditionalists weaponizing the liturgy, weaponizing the Eucharist, weaponizing the liturgy. Well, what has Pope Francis been doing every Maundy Thursday since the beginning of his pontificate? But basically weaponizing the mandatum.
I think he's done the same thing, or at least allowed the same thing to be done.
Presenting things in order to convey his
creche,
message.
The nativity creche. I mean, it's if you pay attention to the nativity creche every year during his pontificate, it's gotten worse and worse. I mean, it started off pretty bad, but you kind of shrug your shoulders, kind of like his pontificate started out. I remember I was a third year graduate student in seminary when he was elected, and everyone kind of, okay, well, let's see. And remember, I think it was the first year that there's that clip of him where he's visiting somewhere and he sees the little altar boy who's there like this as he's passing by, and he takes his wrists and he pulls his hands apart, and you could tell he's scolding him. And we all kind of went, well, I don't know. Now, I mean, at some point, and we are. I mean, we're calling him out, but these, I think people who desire to be faithful, meaning that, yes, as I read it here, okay, we're a nation of 320 some odd million people, a quarter of which claim to be Catholic. Okay, and of that quarter, 25%, supposedly about 20% say they attend Holy Mass. And then of that 20%, you're only going to get about probably, I think, 10 or 15% that say they believe in the real presence. How do you go from, such a large swath in each category, and then we talk about what is central, what the Vatican councils call the fons, the source and summit of our life, and then they go, but that's just symbol. That's just something nice to think about. That's where I think that we're missing that. This is what it's about to me, is that you're talking about abrogating apostolic tradition, which he can't. He doesn't have that authority, and he knows it. And this same Vaticanista, who I've watched and who does good stories, and there's a reason why I watch him, uses this argument that it's not apostolic tradition, it's liturgical discipline. And this is precisely under the authority of the Pope. And, when you look at it as liturgical discipline, well, there probably is an argument to be made. But that's where I think that, that's why I think the disconnect is with Traditionis Custodes, is that it's really about the Blessed Sacrament. And because, let's face it, we're old Romans. We have doubts about the new sacraments. We'll call them okay. What if our doubts, because if I didn't think I was right in my doubts, it might be my doubts, okay. What does Traditionis Custodes really doing? If all those Novus Ordo priests, if what they're doing is doubtful, then what happens if all the traditional priests, the priests who are properly trained and understand and offering the holy sacrifice, what happens when they disappear? Is that possible?
Well, I mean, part of the problem there has been that so-called traditionalist priests, for example, of the Institute of Christ the King, Sovereign Priest, or of the Fraternity of St. Peter, or any of those traditionalist groups, everybody, they look traditional, they behave in a traditional way, they even say traditional things and seem to teach traditional things, and yet they're happy to be ordained by men who have not been consecrated with a traditional rite. And ultimately there is a weird kind of disconnect amongst those people, because on the one hand you say you hate Vatican II, you hate the Novus Ordo Missae, you want nothing to do with it, so you've joined these Ecclesia Dei communities and congregations in order to realize a traditional Catholic life without having to have anything to do with the Novus Ordo, and yet at the same time, seemingly you're happy to say that the Novus Ordo is a valid mass, and that the Novus Ordo rites are valid sacraments, and that the Second Vatican Council is okay. It doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. So, in terms of for your average Catholic layperson, well, in one sense, it makes perhaps no difference if the Ecclesia Dei congregations and communities capitulate to the Novus Ordo, because in one sense, they weren't really traditional, and thus the default for tradition still applies, which is the SSPX, the Sedes, the Old Romans, and the Independents, where you have bishops consecrated in and with and by and through the traditional pontifical, and where you have clergy ordained with the traditional pontifical, where there is no question and no doubt as to the belief, the doctrines, and the intentions, the sacramental intentions of those bishops and of those priests. So the question remains then is really, how will the laity respond ultimately? Because actually, as Blessed Fulton Sheen prophesied, it'll be the laity potentially that will save the church. It won't be the bishops, it won't be the clergy and the religious, it'll be down to the laity. So the question is, well, what will you, the faithful, what will you do? Will you just put up and shut up and cower down and obey this unjust law and wait for another pope? Or will you vote with your feet, and will you leave and support the traditionalist chapels and churches of the SSPX and others? Or will you make a noise? Will you resist Peter like Paul did to his face? And are you prepared to back and financially support the traditionalist minded clergy to do that? I think it'd be interesting to know whether Cardinal Burke or Bishop Athanasius Schneider or any of those believed that if they were to make a real stand, what sort of support they could expect. Now, we know from past experience, from Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre through to us Romans way back in the 19th century, we know what to expect, we know what Rome will do, but the question will be, what will the faithful do? Will they support tradition or not? That's really what it comes down to. Now, there are those who say, well, okay, maybe we should wait. Maybe we should wait for the next pope, because seemingly Popular rumor is that perhaps Pope Francis is coming to the end of his earthly life. Now, no one should wish that, of course, for him. But the question is, will what happens re the next pope? Now, if you look, and this is where really you see people should be watching, is to see, what are the papabile doing? Who are the hot favourites to succeed Francis, and what are they doing right now? What are their reactions? Now, interestingly, in positions, for example, Cardinal Tagle, former Archbishop of Manila. He doesn't have a diocese, so we don't know. So he hasn't got to implement this motu proprio. Cardinal Burke, of course, also doesn't have a diocese, so nothing can be deduced from that. But it would be interesting to know what. Well, we can see. We know how Wilson Gregory, for example, we've seen how he's responded. We pretty much know how Supich would like to respond if he thought he could get away with it, and that's not to say that he won't try. Who knows how long St. John Cantius has in its present form.
Not long.
Not long. I mean, you see, now that'll be interesting. What will happen if Cardinal Supich turns to St. John Cantius and says, right, from now on, Novus Ordo Missae only. Now, he might be clever, and he might say, oh, you can do it in Latin, though. He might be sensitive enough to do that. There's nothing in history that suggests that, but he might be, just this once, partially sensitive enough to suggest, and clever enough to suggest, well, St. John Cantius, you must go completely Novus Ordo, but if you want to do it in Latin, that's fine. He could do that. He might do that. What, however, will the canons of St. John Cantius, how will they respond? Will they just nod their heads and tip their berettas and say, yes, Your Eminence, that's what we'll do? And if they do comply, what will the faithful there do?
Yeah, I don't think. I think the way it's going is that, especially with the canons and the other communities happen to be in Chicago that are dedicated to the traditional form, it's a little bit more difficult for him because they have constitutions. And in those constitutions, it gives their mission. And dependent upon how it's worded, and whether it's in Latin or whether it's in English, is going to depend upon, I'm sure he's got canon lawyers working on it. Because after what Francis did with Traditionis Custodes, we can expect anything now. And to think that Supich would not himself do something as drastic as Traditionis Custodes, I think he will. And I think that's what they're doing. I think that's the only reason we haven't heard from him is because they are writing the document and they're going to find a way to do exactly what you said. And like in the history of the church, when this hasn't exactly happened, but like with my own community, the Marians, and when they went from solemn vows to simple vows, there sort of is this vacatio legis, and because the men joined a community of solemn vows, they're allowed to leave freely, and give in good standing and go joining another community of solemn vows if they desire. Or they could stay, but they have to reprofess under the simple vows. And so I think that they'll give them something like this, out saying, well, you can go to SSPX. I guess that'll be the only place that they go to. They could come to us, except we can't offer them what the SSPX can offer them. And I'm afraid that many of them are looking for that because more and more, something that's been coming to my heart and mind over the last couple of weeks, and I couldn't figure out why. It wasn't only until a few minutes ago that it kind of came to me. And years and years ago, I found this little book when I was doing adoration. It was a little black book like this, and it had a one-word title, and I forget. It started with a T, um, but I figured maybe I'm supposed to read it or whatever, and I started reading it, and I think I read it that same day. It's probably 80, 90 pages, but it was a story about the priests in England during the terrible times of when they had to hide. When you had, I forget, there's a name for them, that many of the houses had these priest holes. Yeah,
priest holes.
And the priests would, under darkness of night, they'd have to hide, but they were coming to say Holy Mass, and people who were in the know knew, go, Father's going to be saying Holy Mass there or there or there. And of course, what this story, and I forget again the name, is a story about where they took them in England to draw and quarter them for being Catholic.
Tyburn.
What? Yes,
Tyburn.
That's it. Yeah. If anybody can find that book, it's a beautiful story, and I feel like, is that what we're getting to? Is that where we're going?
Well, I suppose. I suppose if Francis reinstituted the Inquisition and did deals with secular governments to.
If you're threatened with excommunication, basically, which for us, even though it might be unjustified or whatever, he doesn't have the power, but for faithful Catholics to be threatened with that's a very serious thing in our hearts. Even if we think it's unjust, we don't want that. Even I don't know if I have the capacity to understand what that means. And so what do we do, most of us? Well, I'll go along because I don't want to be excommunicated, so I'll just go along and I'll give it up. I'll sacrifice everything that I desire, and I'll go along so I'm not excommunicated. And that's why, to me, that's kind of what we're being threatened with, is that either go along with all of this, because there's been a couple of places here in this country that they're already seeing a sort of survey going around coming from the Chancery that says, okay, you're going to have to ask these people, do they deny Vatican II? Do they, all these things that they have to approve of? And, I wonder how many, for instance, because there's a suggestion out there that all of the people who were going to the August 15th or August 14th Pontifical High Mass in D.C. to go ahead and still show up. But now it's going to be a protest. I don't know how many people will go, but imagine if they did. Okay. Then we took a survey, if they could remain anonymous, of how many of them actually agree or approve of Vatican II, of the changes. I would bet that it would come out. In fact, I would have to bet. I would bet the answers would be in the 90% that they don't agree. Now flip it and say, okay, now we've got the authority here, the bishops here, and he's going to ask you 5 simple questions. Vatican II, all the sacraments, the Pope, all that. All of a sudden, no, I'm a good Catholic. I know it's an ecumenical council, and we have to. And okay, go on your way. How is that not like what we've seen with Maoist China? What we've seen with all of the tyrannies over the histories, except now there's this sort of lining up of secular and spiritual authority, and unfortunately, the secular seems to be overcoming the spiritual authority. And of course, we know it didn't start with Francis. This started. I think the old Romans have it right. This started in the late 17th century, and anybody can go back and read their history of when this sort of meddlings with modernism. And why? Because of money. Because the Pope was out of money. And so he had to receive money from places where he didn't normally take it from, and I'm sure they didn't give it free. They asked, and it took 100 years, but they got it. I'm convinced that's why Pius XII changed the prayers for the Holy Week and the way Holy Week was. That, of course, it didn't start with him. I'm sure Pius the Ninth started it, then Pius the 11th, and then it finished with Pius the 12th. And at the time, you're thinking, I think the same thing was going on. Well, good thoughts, good people. Let's see what we can do. Let's try to bring everybody in so that everybody gets along. But then all of a sudden, you get something like the thought of the Vatican councils, where, well, we have to change in order to bring everybody else in. It was flipped. No, you can't change the truth. You represent the truth, which is how they came up with the new evangelization. You represent the truth, but the thing is that they were representing a false truth. They were taking everything that the church is in her institutions and in the places where they kind of have a soapbox, and they used it. I think what you were saying, it is. I'll say it. You said it, to hoodwink us into accepting a faith that is not a faith. It's not capital F faith, it's small f faith. Same word, just changing the capital letter. But they didn't tell us. And they muddled everything up, and everything that we kind of knew, Our Lady, the Rosary, prayer. You can do this, it's all directing you. And it wasn't. But all they needed was about 50 years, 60 years, And look, even when I was reading this article about McCarrick and where he is, in the founder of that community, the Paraclete Fathers is the name of the community. The founder of that community intended it for, he founded it, I think, in the late 40s. And at that time, the priests that were really struggling were struggling with mental problems, alcoholism, and it really was a place that was needed. Then, before his death in the late 60s, the church, the bishops were starting to send these priests with homosexual tendencies, with who had problems with children, all that. And he wrote to the bishop of his diocese and said, we cannot take men like that, because that is not something that can be dealt with in these ways. You have to remove these men from ministry, from everything, and they have to go someplace that is specifically dealt. I think everybody gets the point. But the moment he died, they changed the rules so that they could take men. Now, I'm going to give you one guess as to why they changed the rules. Money. Because the founder was not concerned about that. He was concerned about the souls of the men he was trying to help. The people who came, the board, always the board of directors, they saw all these bishops all over the country saying, hey, take these men and we'll send you all the money you need. And in a way, I kind of see that happening. It can happen with this movement as well. The money. And I'm going to give an example, and I haven't had a lot of time to think about it, but I don't know if you saw that Father Altman made a $100,000 donation. Now,
yeah, to the campaign for cancelled priests, coalition for cancelled priests. Yeah,
good cause. But my first thought was, wait a minute, wasn't it just a couple of weeks ago where Father Altman didn't have any money? People were worried about him for those reasons, for his parents. Now he's making, which I'm not saying the donation is bad, but I'm not sure it looks that good for him to make a $100,000 donation like that.
Well, I think there is something strange about the sort of context. As far as I know, something like 600,000 was actually raised for Father Altman, And he made a deal at the first public meeting of the Coalition for Council Priests, and said that if they raised 100,000, he would match fund from what had been raised for him. Now, that means that the Coalition for Council Priests now presumably has $200,000 in the bank, and rising, and that Father Altman has 500,000 for him and his parents to provide for them. Now I think that we have to remember that despite the optics, as you rightly said, Father Altman had nothing. I mean, he was going to be, on his ear with nothing, and his parents. So I think, one can appreciate the groundswell of charity in response that raised however many 100,000 it was. I think it was, I heard 6 somewhere, but it might not have been that much. But anyway, now he didn't solicit that money. He didn't campaign for that money. The laity did. So the faithful of his parish and his supporters, lay supporters, likewise those who formed the Coalition for Council Priests. It's all lay led. It's all lay run. So Father Altman didn't solicit those initial donations. It was all done, on his behalf and for him as an expression of charity. And I have to say, I mean, I hear what various people say about Father Altman, and I don't see it myself. That is to say, those who question his humility, those who question his motives for doing his personal appearances, etc. My own feeling from, and I've never met him, I'm only going by what I can see. I feel that he's a genuine soul. I do feel that he's a genuine soul. I think he was a great pastor, and by all accounts he was. I see that he has, I get that sense from him, and of that he is that he loves souls, that he loves people. So I don't question his motives. I question the way he's gone about things a little bit. So when he he's made it quite clear that he's going to fight the canon law case, but at the same time he's not too bothered about abiding by the so-called restrictions that have been put upon him. Now he's not.
No,
he's not going out of his way to break them. He's not going out of his way to break them. But
like you, I don't know him, and I don't know, but he's not going out of his way to break them. I've got to believe that, at least from what I get from him, because like you, I only can watch or read. He's a lawyer, a secular lawyer, trained canonist. In other words, he's not a dumb guy. He's an intelligent man. Okay. Intelligent men don't typically do things or accept things or produce things that haven't been well thought out, because that's who they are. That's how they do things. It seems logical to them, especially someone like Father Altman. But this seems illogical to me, because if what he's saying and what he's preaching, if he believes that, then there's something very wrong. Because like you were saying, then how is it that you embrace all of this over here, but you're pointing to something else? Your theology, you're speaking a theology that we understand, that you and I can say, okay, but then all of a sudden you're saying, well, I'll accept all these other things, which are clearly wrong from Vatican II theology or Vatican theologies, you could say. So that's where I run into a problem with him, because if he truly stood up for that which he says he believes, he'd lose everything, everything. And there are those who will say, well, that wouldn't be prudent for him because of that, because he's still a voice, because he's still able to get out there, because people are, he's still reaching people. And so it's more prudent for him to walk the line than to toe the line, even on the other side, even on our side.
Yeah. I mean,
So-
I'm not convinced that he is a traditionalist.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced that he is a traditionalist. I think he's a traditionalist sympathizer.
Okay, so do you think his money's coming from traditionalists? Novus
I
Ordo?
suspect some of it. I suspect some of it is. But I think it's mostly Novus Ordo conservatives.
And okay, let's take that. Okay,
You know,
where does it?
the sort of Napa Valley retreatants.
Yeah, those are nice to have if you can get them, because they'll pay a good price for a retreat, and they won't come to a retreat that's free. You've got to charge them $2,500, or they won't come. But that's what I'm saying. Let's take that. Let's take that much of this money is coming from Novus Ordo sympathizers. Okay. Do those people believe in what Father Altman is preaching? If they are in fact, let's use the word, attached to the Novus Ordo and its theology and everything that comes with it.
Well, I think this is the what I consider to be the insidious and pernicious nature of the beast that is modernism and that is Novus Ordoism, and is it all stems from that deliberate manipulation and use of ambiguous terminology and language in the Vatican II documents, and ever since, that you can read things either way. You can read them however you want to. You can read them in a really progressive way, or you can read them in a really traditionalist way. And again, that's why I say, fundamentally at core, the real issue here is about the faith and about clarity on faith. So these, so traditionalist Novus Ordo, on the one hand, they believe that they believe what we believe to be tradition.
Yeah.
But in actual fact, they don't. Because they are not traditionalists.
Don't tell them that.
Because if they believed what we believe, they would be with us.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And this is the same. Even though God bless them, even those traditionalists within the Novus Ordo. So not talking about the neoconservative Novus Ordoites, but even the traditionalists like the FSSP and the I whatever their abbreviation is, the Institute and all the rest of it. They believe that they believe what we believe, and yet they don't, because why do they still have anything to do with the Novus Ordo?
Yep.
And this is why I said last week, if a great way to respond to Pope Francis and what he has stated in his accompanying letter to the motu proprio would be to call for the discussion, call for a definitive interpretation of Vatican II. You could easily phrase it, "Dear Holy Father, in response to your blah 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 blah, we believe it would help matters tremendously if a definitive interpretation of the Vatican II documents was commissioned and promulgated. And then, Holy Father, everyone will be able to sign up knowing exactly what it is they're signing up to."
So if he says something like, well, the post-conciliar fathers have already answered that, You'll find that in every document that came out after the Vatican Councils. And I'm telling you that this is the way, that the Novus Ordo Missae is the way, along with its theology. That's the way. I'm the Holy Father, and this is discipline. This is my area, and I'm guarding the unity of the Church.
So, what is the definitive interpretation of Amoris Laetitia then, Holy Father? Is it, as you suggested, that document written by the Argentinian bishops' conference, when you answered, well, that's as good as, which he did. He more or less said, well, that's as good as an interpretation as anybody else's.
I think he'd say to either one of us, you're being too rigid. Open your heart.
And I would say, pot calling kettle.
That is where we
pot
end
calling
up.
Kettle.
Yeah, and I think that in the last several months, I've had to field lots of questions about what I'm doing and all of that, even with my former brothers in my community, and and then right now, no one has contacted me since Traditionis Custodes. I'm waiting, and I have contacted them saying, "Hey, what do you think? Well, tell me but they won't contact me, and I know why. But what you just said is precisely where I think we end up. We were already there, except that he does have, I'm going to put it in quotes, he does have legitimate authority. Okay, only meaning that he's the Pope. I mean, and all that means, just like I would point to the pastor or a bishop and say, well, he is the pastor, he's a bishop. Now, we can dig deeper from there, which I think we're doing, he's the Pope. But, and again, I'm going to go back to this Vaticanista that I was talking about earlier, because it does come, and what we talked about yesterday, it's coming down to, is it discipline, or it has to be apostolic tradition. It can't just be something that's been around for longer than 30 years. Is it apostolic tradition? Because it's untouchable if it's apostolic tradition. And he's saying discipline. And that's why I think that he's going to continue to answer the questions that you put up, that I put up, with it's a discipline thing, and I'm the disciplinarian. I'm the chief disciplinarian. And this is the way we could go, so we can get rid of all this divisiveness in the Church. And so what you were saying about having an authentic interpretation of Vatican II, I'm afraid to call for that. Because they might actually do like they did now. They're, okay, we're going to authentically interpret. And they're going to put in guys in the Council for Legislative Text. All right, they're going to have people in there who are already progressive, who already know exactly the answers they want. And they're going to write out an interpretation that is in line with what he's doing. Because they'll do it.
Fine. I've no problem with that. I've no problem with that.
Yeah. But I think that
I've absolutely no problem with that. But the people who will have a problem, and the Institute of Christ the King Sovereign Priest, and all those other fake traditionalists, they who think they're traditionalists, but accept Vatican II and accept, in principle, the Novus Ordo. And because they do.
And something Vatican II, because even with me in the seminary, when I was recently in, and everyone knew I remember so well after I made my first vows, and I had asked if I would be allowed to wear the cassock. And boy, they had to have meetings and everything. And finally, because I knew that they couldn't tell me no, because the Marians are known as a Orthodox traditional community. But I was finding out different as I was there. So anyway, I was allowed to wear it. I remember my superior told me, don't make it a habit, but you can wear it. Well, guess what? I never took it off. The moment after my vows, I always had it on. And I remember so well being ready for dinner in the refectory, and one of the priest I hadn't seen since I made my vows, walked in, and he saw me because I had my aunt, who's a seamstress, made me a proper cassock with 33 buttons. And he looked at me and says, "What is he, a traditionalist?" And everybody kind of chuckled, and I chuckled, but I was. But at that time, you were kind of allowed to exist, within. It was only until I got closer and closer and closer. It couldn't find anything wrong, and I wouldn't give up my beliefs until they finally had to say, "Well, you just can't stay here. That's all." And that's really what it is. That's what's going to come down to all of these guys. And I wonder, because like with me, when this movement to go back to our original habit and all of that, the white habit and all that, there were at least, I'd say 8, maybe 12 of us, because I wasn't alone, but how many made it? How many lasted? They're all still there, but they're not with me. I'm the only one that said, well, I guess if that's the way it's going to be, it's so, it is going to get to that, I think. And I wonder how many of the FSSP, the ICs, that's what I call them, the ICs, how many of them are going to say, well, I guess I can't be here anymore because they're really teaching heresy. They're not going to say that.
Well, no, because what they've, instead of being conclavist, they became enclavist. And their argument will be, for as long as the FSSP and the ICs and all the rest of it can be self-contained, like a religious order, then they're safe. But that could all just as easily be undone.
Yeah, very easily. With
the stroke of a legislative pen.
Yeah.
That could be disbanded, dismantled straight away.
And I have to
look what he did. Look what he did to the Franciscans, the Friars of the Immaculate.
Yes. Mm-hmm. That's right.
You see, everybody seems to have forgotten that. Yeah, everybody seems to have forgotten that. Look what he did to them.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't shirk from doing the same again.
And I think arguably, while I know there were problems in their hierarchy as well, I knew a lot of those men. Some of them, very dedicated men, very pious, devout men, as opposed to maybe some of my experiences with the other communities, the types that I would meet. This was different than that community. So if he can do it to them, you're right. And I have to believe that in the Vatican, in the chanceries here in the United States, all over the world, they already know this. They already know what they're going to do, what they have to do, because the church is the church. There are certain things that have to be written out, and I think they're doing it. That's why I think in Chicago, they're in for a big, big surprise.
Yeah. Well, we live, as the Chinese say, in interesting times. We live in interesting times, and they're just getting more and more interesting all the time. But and there is, how can I say this? Because on the one hand, it could be very easy for us to sort of watch from the sidelines and sort of our heads and smile smarmily and sort of say, yeah, well, told you. But I think that really what we are trying to do, and I think what we're trying to do specifically with discussing this subject of Traditionis Custodes, is to try and help those who are in the middle of the wood, surrounded by the trees, trying to help them, trying to throw them a lifeline, and trying to help them to see objectively what's going on. Because you know the phrase, you can't see the wood for the trees, and people like the FSSP and the IX and all the rest of it, they're in the thick of it, perhaps cannot see as clearly and objectively as we can. I mean, that's giving them then the benefit of the doubt. That's then saying, okay, maybe they're not, maybe they're not really complicit with the Novus Ordo. Perhaps they would prefer not to be, but they don't see a way out. But to which, you know, my encouragement to them would be, well, if the SSPX can do it, if we can do it, so can you. But what you can't do, and I don't think that what it isn't possible to do anymore, Francis is saying, it is not possible to have a foot in both camps. You cannot say that you agree with Vatican II and you recognise the validity of the Novus Ordo, and then refuse to have anything to do with the Novus Ordo, and continue to espouse perspectives and doctrines that are contrary to the Vatican Council.
I think that's interesting. Do you think that Francis is asking the same question to them, just in the opposite way? You cannot hold those traditional values and ascribe to who the church is.
I mean, that's exactly how I read his, you know, the first article of the motu proprio and his letter. To me, it's him laying down a gauntlet. He's laying down a challenge. He is basically underscoring the Second Vatican Council and the Novus Ordo Missae, and he is saying, I am saying this is what is Catholic. If you want to be a legitimate Catholic, you have to sign off on Vatican II. You have to accept the validity of the Novus Ordo.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting that it seemed that he used a couple of times something that's fallen out of use, the royal we.
Yeah, I mean, that's this. I mean, yeah, Bishop Kelly noticed that as well. I didn't notice it quite as quickly because I still use that if I write a pastoral letter or whatever, I still use that. Traditionalist bishops do. But yeah, Bishop Kelly noticed that. He is a man of contradictions. You know, on the one hand, he wants to be this liberal, progressive, approachable Pope, and then on the other hand, he is the most rigorist, the most dictatorial. You know, it's like on the one hand, he wants to, you know, this Francis the humble, but actually, you know, he is Francis the dictator. You know, I mean, who is he?
Yeah. But
which would the real Pope Francis please step forward?
Well, I remember that those were the first reports out of Argentina that as a superior, he was known as someone who's, it was my way or nothing. That's the way he governed, and that's one of the reasons he was removed as soon as they could. He was removed as superior in the Jesuit province there. That's right. And so there's no surprise. I mean, we all hoped for more, you know, but he's really given us exactly what he was supposed to. And it's for the other side, you know. But I know that we sound like a broken record sometimes. I sound like a broken record, but I think it's important, the point that you made, that, you know, we are not trying to, or our intention is not to be smarmy and sit on the sidelines and go, told you, shouldn't expect it. I don't know why you guys are crying. This is exactly what was coming. That can be easy and maybe even comforting in a sense to do. But we're reaching out more. At least I feel like, I know that's what we're doing. we're trying to reach out more, because if you look at it simply as so many of the faithful do feel themselves left in the midst of the forest in the dark. They thought they were safe. They thought they knew where they were. Now all of a sudden, maybe they don't. And it seems like there's not anyone there to give you maybe some hard answers, because they are difficult things to think about and some difficult answers. But the most wonderful thing is that the faith has remained the same. And we profess to that. That's what we're saying, is that what we offer you in direction, in guidance, in sacraments, in what the church truly is certain. Everything, the sacraments are certain. There's nothing here that we're giving you that the church hasn't given for centuries. And I think the interesting point about Traditionis Custodes, that Pope Francis tried to use Pius V and what he did with the 200-year rule, basically. And he was wrong. It's not going to abrogate his document, but he was wrong in his citation of history. And just for our viewers, that Pius V, when he canonized the Roman Rite in 1570 with the Missale Romanum, that there were other rites going on. There were other ways in the church, and he simply said that if it had 200 years, it had been going on for 200 years, then continue as you are.
Yeah.
Okay, what does that say for the Novus Ordo Missal that's not even 50 years old? It would have been gone. It would have been one of the ways that could have been going on. For all we know, something like it might have been going on. That he said, done, out, all of those, because there must have been other things going on for him to say only those that have been 200 years or more, consistently offered. And so now we have Francis trying to use that, but of course, he would have had to said the Novus Ordo doesn't work either, because what his argument, I think, begins correctly, but it should lead to, well, it's obvious what was done beginning in the 60s with the Second Vatican Council. We need to go back to the table. And so let's go back and use the sacraments and the certainty like they were at that time, and we'll have to redo it. Okay, that's not the way he went. He went the other way. Rather than be certain in what we know to be certain for centuries, what is new is now old.
Yeah. And of course, the other difference between with Pius V was that when he promulgated the Missal of Trent, he said, and I make this widely available. Anybody can use this.
Yes.
You can use what you've been using for the last 200 years, or you can use this. And what's more, I'm going to say that nobody can ever take this away from you. Now, bearing in mind that the Missal, the Roman Missal of 1570, it's practically identical with the Roman Missal of 1474, which was the last printed edition of the Roman Missal, and that was pretty much the same as the one before it, and so on and so on and so forth. So Pius V wasn't introducing a new Missal. That's not what he did at all. He simply said, right, this is the standard Missal in Rome. I'm now making this available to the whole church. You no longer, if you're not, in the archdiocese, if you're not in the Diocese of Rome, if you're not in the province, doesn't matter. If you want to use this mass, despite the local use, then I give you that permission. I'm allowing you the use of this mass. So this is quite contrary.
Yeah.
To because what Francis is saying, you can't use. Francis is saying, I'm taking this away. You can't use it anymore.
Yeah.
Whereas Pius V said, I'm giving you this, and nobody can take it away from you.
Yeah.
You couldn't get more antithetical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as you were explaining that, I was thinking about the other thing that happened at Trent was about the Bible. and the books of the Bible, how it was codified. You know, okay, were there other books out there? Were there other things being read in other parts of the world that ended up not being part? Yeah, there were. But there, you know, there was an agree. Okay, these are the oldest. These are the ones that are being used around the world. You know, yes, and he. I think if I remember my history correctly, for instance, like I think even till this day, in the Ethiopian church, you might find a couple of different things because they're
Oh
very
yeah,
very old.
more than a couple.
But yeah, but they're very ancient, and they
Oh, very
simply held
ancient. Yeah,
on
very ancient.
to what they had. You know, so I think, you know, so now I think if we look at that, what Francis has done is saying to me is like, well, it's equal to saying, here's a new book of the Bible. I know we've only been using it for 50 years, but the rest are now gone because this encapsulates everything that the four Gospels do. But right here, brand new, you don't have to worry about that stuff anymore. Here you can have everything that was in there is in here. What would we say? We would say, you can't do that. You can't abrogate the Holy Gospels. What's wrong with you? In fact, you're a heretic. Uh, is that not this? Is that not what he's doing?
Well, yes, to my mind, that's exactly what he's doing. Um, you know, it's. I mean, the whole thing, as Bishop Kelly would say, it's a bowl of spaghetti. It's a bowl of spaghetti. It's a right mess. It really is a mess. The whole thing. And you know what is a real problem, a very real problem, fundamental problem to the whole thing, is the inability for straight talking, because they can't do it anymore. You know, and you know, the Vatican II documents are written deliberately with ambiguous language that could be interpreted any which way. I mean, and if you know, when you read magisterial documents post Vatican II and then compare them with magisterial documents before Vatican II, okay, pre-Vatican II magisterial documents were just as wordy. Okay, they were just as verbose, but at least you knew what they were saying. At least you knew what they were saying. Whereas post-Vatican II magisterial documents, you have to read once and then twice and then another time, and then you look up the footnotes and you read the thing from the Second Vatican Council, and you think, you read that once and then you read it again and then read it again, and then you think, oh, okay, I should cross-reference this with something else. Then you read the Catechism, and then you notice, oh, hold on a minute, all these sources are self-referential. They just refer to each other. I'm just going around in circles here, because hardly ever is there a footnote, is there a citation or quotation from anything pre-Vatican II. Hardly ever. Hardly ever. Yeah, I mean, you know, I've no problem saying that a percentage of the doctrines of Vatican II appear to be heretical. And I've no problem saying that the theology, conceptually, of the Novus Ordo is not Catholic.
And you know as well as I do that some of them will look back at you, the meaning in the Vatican, and go, well, that's what we wanted, so that Christianity can unite. Because
of course, that's the other great lie. But see, that's the other great lie, isn't it? you know, this unity hasn't happened. This unity hasn't happened, and the denominations signed up to it fast diminishing. You know, where in after 50 years, where has this ecumenism gone? Nowhere.
Well, it's our fault. That's what they're telling us. It's your fault.
Yeah,
it's my fault.
Yeah, it's got nothing to do with us. It's got nothing to do with us.
If everyone would just get on board, then the church would be united, the world would see the church united, and people would begin to see it as a safe place to go.
But to which I'd say, well, it's not as if you're worried about us when you're signing agreed statements of faith with the Anglicans or with the Lutherans or, you know, with anybody else. So why don't you just get on with it? Why don't you just realise this unity that you all say is there?
Mm-hmm.
Get on with it.
Yeah, it's something nefarious, and I can't quite put my finger on it because
it doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense.
No.
It doesn't add up.
It reminds me of what we're going through now from a secular perspective. You know, I'm not sure what's going on there in the UK, but here, all of a sudden, Biden's saying, well, looks like we're going to new lockdowns. For what? Mm-hmm. What's going on here? You know, it doesn't make any sense. You know, the masks and all that. And so the same thing we say in the church is it's not making any sense. And so that's when the people that have been following me over the years, and they get to that point, I say, aha, you're right. It's not making any sense. Well, you can look at us. Everything we do makes sense. Not because it's something that came up from some committee of old Romans saying, let's do this way. We're simply are who we've been forever. You know, I think in the church, because a lot of people don't know that our history is traced back, you know, to the 4th century. So even though we are not that, the See of Utrecht, you know, but that's where we come from. And that's what we have simply continued offering and the sacraments of the church as they have been untouched until the 60s when they changed them. And so there is certainty here. That's one of the messages I try to get people. You don't have to try to wrap your head around it. It's just think of all those saints that you're devoted to. I bet almost every single one of them became saints through the church that they knew. Not. I don't know. I'm sure that there's probably saintly people now, but I don't know how they got there. How much of their saintliness comes from truly following what Vatican II says. I would think, for me, my opinion would be 0. If you're truly following what Vatican II says, you're getting a big 0. But I think most of these people that I know that you know that are devoted, pious individuals, intent, as you started the show, their intent is to truly get close to God. And they're the ones that are having a real problem right now because their heart, you know, the Spirit speaks to our heart, and their heart is noticing something's wrong. How can this be? And unfortunately, I think it's going to come to that where they're going to see us martyred again. And maybe
maybe that needs to happen, you know? Maybe that needs to happen. I mean, this is, you know, when you study the development, you know, the real actual organic development of the liturgy, one of the things we note is, you know, in the early church, there was a slightly more positive energy and emphasis, particularly on end times, particularly on, you know, everything from a kind of eschatological perspective, because they were they wanted the end time because they were being martyred. Then in the medieval period, everything sort of changes. So it becomes the church felt that she needed to lay greater emphasis on penance, on hell, on eternal punishment, etc., because with Christendom established, people were getting lax and becoming apathetic and becoming spiritually lazy. So the in the medieval period, the church then develops this more emphasis on our need for redemption and of doing penance, etc. Well, I think we're in a situation now where we've had 50 years of nobody talking about hell, nobody talking about sin. Sin now is down to choices. It's all about hurt, isn't it? It's if I only sin if I actually hurt someone else. So if I sin but I don't hurt you, then that's okay. So if I abuse myself because I'm not abusing somebody else, then that's okay. How can that be sinful? Or if me and somebody else are mutually consenting to abusing each other, then that's okay too, because we're not hurting each other, so that's fine. So on and so forth. That's it's very rare these days for people to talk about sin with any seriousness, and certainly not in the way that they used to. And that is, developed a situation. So, one of my criticisms, for example, of the conciliar church now is for all this freedom, for all this liberality, for all this, it doesn't matter what you do what you like, blah, 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 blah. Why then is the church dying? Why is the church dying? Surely they should be flocking. Shouldn't they be flocking in their droves to come in to this wonderful, liberating, progressively, so on and so forth? But they're not, are they? And they're leaving. They're leaving. You get that wonderful crop of First Holy Communions, and what percentage of them will you get in 4 or 5 years' time for confirmation? And how many of them will come back for sacramental marriage? How many of them will then send their children for First Holy Communion? It's dying. Why? Because they're not getting anything. They're not fed. They're not nourished. They're not taught. And what they are taught is they can get from their second grade RE teacher, if there was such a thing. But you know what I mean? They can get their morals and their principles and their guide for life and all the rest of it from social workers and from psychotherapists and from counselors and Reiki healers and why do I need viaticum? Why do I need anointing with a stick? I can just go to a Reiki healer. I can get people, somebody lay their hands on me that way. They're just as spiritual. This is the reality, and what gets me is they're the ones who keep saying, you're not, you don't know, you're not in the real world, you don't understand how. I am. I'm seeing the world for what it is. You're not. You're the one who keeps thinking you can compromise, thinking you can take on secular perspectives and values and all the rest of it, and think somehow that'll appeal and will get you more people in. And at the end of the day, are you sure it's actually souls you want to save, or is it just more money you want coming in? You want to backfill from all the money you've lost over the last 50, 60 years. Prove me wrong. Show me the stats that prove otherwise.
I was, they're not there. And I think I know, here in Detroit, we have a couple of parishes, meaning a couple, that are looked at as successful. And one of them that I'm thinking about, it's a huge parish. It's probably got 5,000 families. They have, so I'm explaining what you would see. So you on the bulletin, you see, oh my gosh, there's 3 masses every day. There's confession offered for a half hour on Saturdays, thanks be to God. There's vigil mass. There's 8 masses on Sunday, and there's even mass at evening. Oh, look at all these things going on. They have a school. They have, okay, the bulletin's 20 pages long. They're collecting $250,000 almost every month. And they've got a vibrant pastor whose preaching is good and people love to come hear them. That's what they want. And when you go there, they've got all the trappings, statuary, candles, you know. But then when you go talk to the pastor and you talk to the RE, the religious education woman, usually, typically, the liturgist, God forbid, there's a liturgist, because there usually is. There's a liturgist. They're all trying to get rid of everything traditional because this is the way to go. All they see is success. No, and they do. They get the people there. They have numbers. They have people in school and all that. But they're, you know, in my mind, they're all losing their souls because they're making allowances for the world in order to put on what they believe is their faith. And it's not. Because the first time you ask, you know, these families, because I'm sure you've seen the examples too. Go and talk to them really about, are they pro-life? Do they know what it means to be pro-life? The choices you have to make if you truly have a pro-life mentality, a proper Catholic mentality. They don't know. They couldn't explain it to you. They just know abortion doesn't touch my family. And then how many stories have you and I both know where it does happen? And that's the first place they go. Because they don't want, you know, they're trying to keep their family together, trying to keep the children. It's all a facade, is my point. It really is. They think that, you know, just because you get in the car and you get the kids in there and they happen to go to that Catholic school, but they're not Catholic. They don't even want crucifixes in the classroom because it offends the 2 Muslim students that happen to be coming here. It's craziness, and people aren't seeing it. They don't see it. That's what the church wants. They want a church like that. And that's when someone like me goes, well, that's not the church. I mean, that's a building, you know, as Mother Angelica used to call it, the airport hangars. That's what it is. It's an airport hangar. And there's lots of people and lots of money. But see, that's how we equate success. I mean, look at Father Altman. Imagine if he was not receiving any money, or maybe very little. What would people think? I mean, I think he would be discouraged because I don't think his bishop has any intention on taking care of him. But now he's got money. I don't know how long it'll last him. I wish he'd be consistent at the very least, but he's not, in my opinion. He's kind of big. To me, he's a superstar. And I think he's falling for the stardom. It's easy to fall for it. Right?
Yeah, I'm not convinced about that. I'm not convinced about that.
I am, and I'm going to use my understanding of the American mentality and Father Altman and what I see in him, and it's it's dangerous for him primarily. But I know it's so easy to get wrapped up in all of that because all of us, because what Father Altman essentially has become is an authority. And now when things happen, our heads turn. Well, what's Father Altman saying? Well, we haven't heard from, I wonder what Father Altman's thinking.
Well, but you say that, but in the last 2 weeks, the last 2.5 weeks, since his motu proprio broke, you know, whereas Father Altman was on every program, everywhere you looked on YouTube and radio, and all the rest of it, he's been missing the last 2 weeks. He appeared with Taylor Marshall a couple of days ago, but otherwise, that's been about it. And my point, you see, with him is that he's got nothing to say about Traditionis Custodes.
Yeah. But, it would be interesting if he would answer, what do you have to say, Father, about this? I'm just wondering, what do you think? I would listen. Okay, Father,
yeah.
tell me what you think. But you're
I'd
right.
listen.
Why is he not saying anything?
Yeah. Well, he's got nothing to say because he's not a traditionalist.
Now, if that was
he
known
can't see what the fuss is
widely,
about.
okay, if that was known widely, do you think he'd have $500,000 in the bank?
Yes. Yes, I do.
I don't think so.
Because
I don't think so.
I think it's the neocons that are backing him.
Well, yeah, but same thing with. I think they're in the same boat. They are, but if to me, the neocons are the first ones to go along to get along. And
yeah,
to me, we're in that period right now. Everybody's still kind of okay. Let's feel it out. Okay, here's a little money here. When we get to the point where you're going to have to say something, Father, you're the one that wanted. It's one of the reasons you got in trouble. Okay, when it comes down to that, we'll see how much money he has, and I don't think he's going to have any money because the neocons are going to say, well, you can't choose that side because if you choose that side, then you're not who you were telling us you were. If you choose our side,
he's not.
Then he's
But which is why he's not saying anything.
Well, that's the way to go if you want to keep everybody happy.
And because I'm sure, as you say, he's not dumb. He's a lawyer, and I'm sure he knows that when his case is rejected, when he loses, because he will, because Rome will side with the bishop, even though it's completely unjust, even though right is totally on his side. It's as plain as the nose on your face to see. But when the decision from Rome comes and they say, no, out, it'll be interesting to see what happens then.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see how keen church militants and the neocons and the Napa Valley retreatants and all that. It'll be interesting to see how supportive they are of him then, when he has been declared officially a canonical criminal. When the church kicks him out officially, it'll be interesting to see what happens then. And I mean, and this is the same. This is the same for the FSSP and the Institute of Christ the King and the rest of it, because that's what this motu proprio is all about as well. If Francis sticks to his guns, and if he lives long enough to see it through, eventually they will be kicked out. And what will happen then? They will be suppressed. What will happen then? Will they just go, oh, okay, Holy Father, and take off their cassocks and blend into the diocese? Or what? It's going to come.
Yeah, it is. It's here.
It's coming. It's coming. Because that's where we are. That is the situation now. Well, right, on that positive note. Well, I think, viewers, bless you. You certainly got your money's worth this week. Nigh on 2 hours there, coming up to, of us waffling on. And that's even after an hour and a half last night, brother. So
that's right.
We must be doing something right.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts, brother, before I give a blessing and we close?
Just that I hope that none of this discourages anybody. That the strength of the martyrs, the peace of the martyrs comes from this. It comes from the willingness to enter the battle, not because we're going to win, but precisely because it's right. It's the truth. I mean, how many of us wouldn't, if Our Lady of our Lord were here and saying, okay, who's going to come along? let's go. You were speaking about apostolic times and post-apostolic times, of how the church, they wanted the second coming. But do we want that? I do. But I wonder, the faithful askers, do you want that? Are you waiting for our Lord to come again? Is that, do you wake up with that? Do you fall asleep with that? I don't know. But I know that if you follow the sacraments as were given to us over the centuries, that you can find here with the old Romans, if you do that and dedicate yourself to that, you will find yourself on the front line, and you'll find yourself saying yes, because it's love. It's out of love for God and for the sake of your own soul and the souls of all those that you know. So don't be discouraged. Be encouraged that we are at a time to where we have to say yes, because the yes is out of love.
Yes, absolutely. Very well put. Very well put. Okay. Next broadcast then on this channel will be the traditional Latin Mass for tomorrow. Nobody answered the question in the comments. What is tomorrow? So I will tell you. Tomorrow is the feast of St. Peter in Chains, St. Petrus ad Vincula, with commemoration of the 10th Sunday after Pentecost, and also commemoration of the 7 Holy Maccabees. In many ways, as one does, I've been thinking about my thoughts for tomorrow, and you can expect in my homily tomorrow some reflections on St. Peter in Chains and the present situation in the church. So that's tomorrow, 8:30 British Summer Time, GMT, live on this channel, the traditional Latin Mass. Then at midday, the Angelus and Bishop Richard Challoner's meditation for every day in the year, which will be on St. Peter's Chains. It won't be on Hell tomorrow. He's been on Hell all this week, as our viewers will know. But tomorrow he changes tack, changes tune, and tomorrow will be about the feast. And then at 6 o'clock, of course, the evening Angelus. So we do hope that you will join us for any or all of those programs. Do please share if you've enjoyed this 2-hour marathon tonight. Then please share it, like it, love it, send it far and wide. If you believe that what we've said is of interest and of value to others who would be, then please do share it. That's the whole point of doing these broadcasts and on these various platforms. So please do share, please do like. If you're watching on YouTube, like it. If you're watching on Facebook, like it. If you're watching on Twitter, share it, retweet it, do whatever, because that all helps us to get the message out there. Okay, let's pray God for a blessing. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Dominus vobiscum. Et cum spiritu tuo, sit nomen Domini benedictum, ex hoc nunc et usque in saecula, auditorium nostrum in nomine Domini, qui feci caelum et terra. Benedictio Dei omnipotenti, Patri et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, descendat super vos et maneat semper. Amen. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Carissimi beloved, bless you and thank you for watching. Thank you for all your support. Thank you for those of you who are regular watchers. Thank you for continuing to support us. We do appreciate it. Please pray for us. Be assured we most certainly pray for you. And as I say, we hope to see you at any or all of the broadcasts in the coming week. Don't forget Domestic Church, particularly on Monday evening. And Brother Stanislaus' new show next Friday. Okay, it's goodbye from me. And it's goodbye from him.
Yes. Thank you.
Take care and God bless.